ATA for telling my brother. His fiancée was cheating right before their wedding. My brother Matt, 29 years old, is the type of guy everyone loves. He's funny, kind, and fiercely loyal to the people he cares about. Growing up, he was my protector and best friend. No matter what life threw at us, Matt was always there to make sure I was okay. So when he introduced us to Sophia, his fiancée, I was ecstatic. She seemed perfect, charming, smart, and absolutely head over heels for Matt. At least that's what I thought. Matt and Sophia got engaged last year after dating for 3 years. Everything seemed picture perfect. They planned a beautiful wedding, and I was honored when Matt asked me to be part of the bridal party. Sophia and I weren't super close, but we got along well enough. I genuinely believed she was the best thing to ever happen to Matt. But then, a few months before the wedding, I found out something that changed everything. It started innocently enough. I was at a coffee shop with some friends when I saw Sophia sitting at a corner table with another man. At first, I didn't think much of it. People have friends of the opposite sex, and it's not unusual to grab coffee with someone. But something about their body language made me pause. They were sitting too close, and Sophia's laugh was different, flirty even. I tried to dismiss it, but as I was leaving the cafe, I saw them kiss. It wasn't a casual peck either. It was the kind of kiss you'd give someone you're in love with. My heart sank. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Instead, I took a photo of them with my phone. Not proud of this, and left. Over the next week, I debated whether to tell Matt. Every time I saw him, so excited about the wedding, I felt a pang of guilt. He deserved to know, didn't he? But what if I was wrong? What if there was some logical explanation? I decided to dig a little deeper. I started following Sophia's social media more closely and noticed she had been tagging a guy named Ethan in a lot of her posts. Most of them were harmless. Group photos, jokes in the comments. But one post stood out. It was a photo of a sunset, captioned, "Grateful for moments like these." Ethan had commented, "Always better with you." I clicked on Ethan's profile, and that's when it all clicked. He had photos of Sophia on his page, including one of them at a bar, arms wrapped around each other. The caption read, "Can't wait for more nights like this." I couldn't stay silent anymore. I decided to confront Sophia first. I called her and asked if we could meet up, claiming I wanted to discuss wedding plans. When we met, I wasted no time. "Sophia, I saw you with Ethan," I said. "I know you're cheating on Matt." Her face turned pale, but she quickly recovered. "What are you talking about?" she said, laughing nervously. "Ethan is just a friend." I showed her the photos I had taken and screenshots of Ethan's posts. She tried to deny it at first, but eventually broke down. "It's complicated," she admitted. "Ethan and I have history. I didn't plan for this to happen, but I don't know. I love Matt, but I can't seem to let go of Ethan." I was furious. "If you love Matt, how can you betray him like this? Do you even plan to tell him?" She begged me not to say anything. "The wedding is so close," she pleaded. "It's just cold feet. I'll end things with Ethan, I promise." I didn't believe her, but I left without making any promises. I agonized over what to do. I wanted to protect Matt, but I also didn't want to ruin his happiness. In the end, I decided he deserved the truth. A week later, I invited Matt over to my apartment. I was shaking as I showed him the photos and told him everything. At first, he didn't believe me. "Sophia would never do that," he said, his voice trembling. "I wouldn't lie about this," I told him. "You need to talk to her." Matt left without saying much, and I didn't hear from him for a few days. When he finally called, he sounded devastated. "She admitted it," he said. "She's been seeing Ethan for months. She said she loves me but doesn't know if she can let him go." The wedding was called off the next day. The aftermath was a mess. Sophia tried to win Matt back, but he refused to forgive her. Our family was divided. Some people thought I did the right thing, while others thought I should have kept quiet. "You ruined his wedding," one relative said. You should have let him find out on his own. Matt has been distant since it all happened. He says he's grateful I told him, but I can tell he's struggling to process everything. Sophia has been spreading rumors that I was jealous of her and wanted to sabotage the wedding, which has only made things worse. I keep wondering if I made the right choice. Did I save Matt from a lifetime of heartbreak? Or did I overstep and destroy his chance at happiness? So, Reddit, ATA for telling my brother the truth about his fiancée, even though it ruined his wedding. The house was quiet, but not in the peaceful way I used to love. It was the kind of silence that hung heavy in the air, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. I sat at the dining table, staring at the untouched plate of dinner I had made for Liam. He hadn't come home again. It wasn't unusual anymore. Liam had always been ambitious, but lately, his late nights at work had taken on a different tone, one I couldn't ignore. The warmth between us had faded over the years, replaced by cold indifference and tense arguments. Mom, when's Dad coming home? My youngest, Sophie, asked as she peeked into the kitchen. I forced a smile, though it felt like my face might crack. I'm not sure, sweetheart. Why don't you finish your homework? I'll let you know when he gets here. Sophie nodded, her big brown eyes filled with the innocence only an 8-year-old could still carry. I watched her walk away, my heart aching. She didn't understand the turmoil simmering beneath the surface, and I wanted to protect her from it for as long as I could. The fight started small, like tiny sparks in dry grass. But they grew quickly, raging into wildfires that left no part of our relationship untouched. You don't appreciate anything I do, Liam shouted one night, slamming the door to the bedroom as I followed him inside. And you think I don't do anything? I shot back, my voice trembling with frustration. I'm the one who keeps this family together while you're off playing the perfect businessman. He laughed bitterly. You're delusional. Do you think this house pays for itself? Or that you'd have the luxury of staying home if I didn't work my ass off? I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead I sat on the edge of the bed and buried my face in my hands. This isn't working anymore, I whispered. Liam didn't respond. He didn't have to. The truth was already hanging between us, undeniable and suffocating. Filing for divorce felt like tearing my own heart out, but it also felt necessary. Our marriage had become a battlefield, and I didn't want our children, Ben, 11, Claire, 9, and Sophie, 8, to grow up in the crossfire. Liam didn't take the news well. You're giving up, he said, his voice sharp with accusation. What kind of example are you setting for our kids? I'm showing them that it's better to walk away from something toxic than to stay and let it destroy you, I replied, my hands shaking as I signed the papers. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Liam was determined to make me pay for what he saw as my betrayal. He hired an aggressive lawyer, digging up every mistake I had ever made and twisting it into ammunition. She's unstable, Liam argued in court. She can't handle the pressures of raising 3 children on her own. It didn't matter that I had been the one who packed their lunches, helped with their homework, and stayed up with them when they were sick. Liam's words, coupled with his impressive salary and carefully curated image, painted me as incapable. When the judge awarded him full custody, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. The first morning without my children was the hardest. I woke up instinctively at 6 a.m., my internal clock conditioned by years of school drop-offs, lunch packing, and the sounds of little feet running down the hall. But the house was silent. Too silent. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty hallway. Ben's room was dark, his bed neatly made, the way I'd left it when I packed up his favorite books and clothes for Liam's house. Claire's art supplies were still scattered on the desk in her room, untouched since she'd begged me not to forget them. Sophie's stuffed unicorn sat forlornly on the couch, abandoned in the rush of their departure. They were gone, and I was alone. The days blurred together, each one more painful than the last. I couldn't stop imagining them at Liam's house, wondering if they missed me as much as I missed them. Were they eating the dinners I used to make, Or had Liam hired someone to cook for them? Did they cry for me at night? Or had they started to forget me already? The court order allowed me visitation rights twice a month, every other Saturday for 6 hours. 6 hours. That was all I had with my children now, a fraction of the time I used to spend with them. The first visitation day felt like a lifeline, even though I knew it wasn't enough. I prepared their favorite snacks, baked cookies from scratch, and set up the living room with board games and movies. When Liam dropped them off, he barely looked at me. The children piled out of the car, their faces hesitant and unsure. "Hi, Mom," Claire said softly, clinging to Sophie's hand. Ben hung back, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Hey, sweethearts," I said, kneeling down to their level. I wanted to hug them, to hold them so tightly they'd never slip away again. But something in their demeanor stopped me. As the hours passed, I noticed a change in them. They laughed and played, but there was a barrier between us, something unspoken that I couldn't quite reach. Ben, who used to talk to me about everything, gave short, clipped answers when I asked him about school. Claire seemed preoccupied, her eyes darting toward the clock every so often. Even Sophie, my baby, seemed quieter than usual. When Liam came to pick them up, Sophie clung to his leg, refusing to say goodbye. "I want to go home," she said, her voice trembling. "You are home, sweetheart," I said, my heart breaking. "No, this isn't home anymore," she whispered. I stood there frozen as Liam loaded them into the car. He didn't say a word, but his smirk as he closed the door said everything. It became clear over the following weeks that Liam was using his time with the children to turn them against me. I overheard Sophie during one of our rare phone calls saying, "Dad says you didn't want us anymore." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "That's not true, baby," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I love you more than anything." "Then why don't we live with you?" I had no answer that would make sense to an 8-year-old. One particularly cold evening, I sat alone in the dark, a glass of wine untouched on the coffee table. The walls of the house seemed to close in on me, the memories of my children haunting every room. I thought about giving up, moving far away, starting over where I wouldn't have to see the life I'd lost. But then I remembered Sophie's laugh, Claire's determination when she worked on her art, and Ben's quiet strength. I couldn't abandon them, even if the system had taken them from me. I had to fight. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a kind but firm woman named Angela. "We need to revisit custody," I said. Angela hesitated. "That's not easy. The judge's decision is hard to overturn without new evidence." "Then we'll find new evidence," I said, my voice hardening. "I don't care what it takes." Angela sighed. "Okay, but you need to be prepared for a long uphill battle." "I don't care how long it takes," I said. "They're my children, and I'm not giving up on them." Determined to fight back, I threw myself into the grueling process of gathering evidence and rebuilding my life. Angela was right. The road ahead was going to be tough, but I didn't care. My children deserved the truth, and I was willing to do whatever it took to prove my worth as their mother. The first step was documenting everything. I started keeping a journal, recording every interaction with Liam and the children. I noted Sophie's heartbreaking comments about not feeling at home, Claire's increasing reluctance to talk to me, and Ben's distant behavior. I also began digging into Liam's life. Through mutual acquaintances and social media, I learned that he had hired a nanny to help care for the kids, something he conveniently omitted during the custody battle when he painted himself as a hands-on father. Angela saw potential in this. "If we can show that he's not as present as he claimed, it could weaken his case," she said during one of our meetings. But it wasn't enough. To challenge the custody ruling, I needed something stronger. During our next visitation, I focused on creating a safe space for the kids. Instead of pressuring them with questions or forcing them to talk, I let them take the lead. We spent the day baking cookies, a tradition we used to share before the divorce. At first, they were hesitant, but as the kitchen filled with the smell of sugar and chocolate, their walls began to crumble. "Mom, remember when we made cookies for the school bake sale?" Claire asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. I do, I said, my heart swelling. You decorated them with sprinkles and they sold out first. Claire giggled, and for a moment it felt like old times. Ben, however, remained guarded. As I watched him quietly stack cookies on a plate, I felt a pang of guilt. He was older, more aware of the tension between Liam and me. Ben, I said softly, how are you feeling about everything? He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. It's fine, I guess. I didn't push him. Instead, I hugged him tightly before they left, whispering, I love you. No matter what, I'll always be here for you. A week later, I received a surprising phone call from Laura, a former neighbor and friend who had moved away shortly before the divorce. I've been meaning to reach out, Laura said. I heard about the custody battle. I need to tell you something about Liam. My heart raced as she continued. I don't know if this will help, but I saw Liam with another woman last year. It was at a restaurant in town, and they looked close. The woman she described matched the nanny Liam had hired, a younger, attractive woman named Julia. I thanked Laura and immediately relayed the information to Angela. If we can prove Liam was already involved with Julia during your marriage, it could cast doubt on his character, she said. I felt a flicker of hope. Angela advised me to hire a private investigator to look into Liam's relationship with Julia. I hesitated at first, feeling uneasy about prying into his personal life, but I reminded myself that this was about my children. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret, was efficient and discreet. Within 2 weeks, she uncovered a trove of damning evidence. 1. Photos of Liam and Julia together at various outings, some dating back to when we were still married. 2. Financial records showing Liam had been paying for Julia's apartment and expenses. 3rd, testimonies from a former co-worker who claimed Liam had bragged about his arrangement with Julia. This paints a very different picture of Liam, Angela said, reviewing the evidence. He's not the devoted, stable parent he pretended to be in court. With the new evidence in hand, Angela filed a motion to reopen the custody case. It was a long shot, but we argued that Liam's dishonesty and questionable behavior warranted a reevaluation of the children's living situation. The court scheduled a hearing, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. The courtroom was tense as Liam and I faced each other once again. He looked confident, his polished suit and smug demeanor a sharp contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. But this time, I wasn't backing down. Angela presented the evidence with precision, highlighting Liam's deceit and lack of transparency. She called witnesses, including Margaret and Laura, who testified about his relationship with Julia. When it was Liam's turn to speak, his charm faltered. He stumbled through his explanations, trying to downplay the significance of the evidence. The judge listened carefully, their expression unreadable. After the hearing, I spent sleepless nights agonizing over the outcome. I couldn't bear the thought of losing my children again, but I knew I had done everything in my power to fight for them. A week later, the decision came. The day of the verdict dawned cold and gray, as though the weather itself reflected the weight of my anxiety. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress and blazer, wanting to appear composed, even though my hands trembled as I buttoned my jacket. Angela met me outside the courthouse, her usual calm demeanor giving me a small measure of comfort. No matter what happens today, remember this. You've done everything you could, she said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I nodded, though her words did little to ease the storm raging inside me. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the judge entered, their expression as unreadable as ever. Liam sat across the aisle, his jaw tight. Julia was conspicuously absent, likely at the advice of his lawyer. The judge shuffled a stack of papers before speaking. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, it is clear that there were omissions and misrepresentations made during the initial custody hearing. My breath caught. Angela placed a steadying hand on my arm, silently urging me to stay calm. While both parents have the right to be part of their children's lives, it is evident that the current arrangement does not serve the best interests of the children. Therefore, this court has decided to modify the custody agreement. I felt the world shift beneath me as the judge continued. The children will remain in shared custody, but primary physical custody will be transferred to Ms. Bennett. Mr. Bennett will retain visitation rights every other weekend and one evening per week. The words barely registered as tears filled my eyes. I turned to Angela, who gave me a rare smile. "We did it," she whispered. Liam didn't take the decision well. As we exited the courtroom, he stormed up to me, his face flushed with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won? You'll never turn them against me." "I don't want to turn them against you, Liam," I said, my voice firm. "I just want to be their mother." He scoffed and walked away, his lawyer trailing behind him. The first night back with my children felt surreal. I spent hours preparing their rooms, making sure everything was perfect. When they arrived, I could see the confusion and hesitation in their eyes, but I also saw glimmers of excitement. "Mom, you kept my art supplies," Claire said, running into her room. "Of course I did," I said, smiling. "I even bought you some new paints." Ben lingered in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "So, we're living here now?" "Yes," I said gently. "But you'll still see your dad. This is just your home, too." He nodded slowly, his walls beginning to crack. Sophie ran to me, her little arms wrapping tightly around my waist. "I missed you, Mommy." I knelt down and held her, tears streaming down my face. "I missed you too, baby. So much." The weeks that followed were challenging. The children had been caught in the crossfire for so long that they didn't know who to trust. I focused on rebuilding our bond, giving them space to express their feelings without judgment. I took them to the park, baked their favorite treats, and helped with their homework. Slowly but surely, the laughter returned to our home. Ben began opening up to me, sharing stories about school and his friends. Claire started painting again, her vibrant artwork brightening our walls. Sophie became my shadow, following me everywhere with her stuffed unicorn in tow. One evening, Ben asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, why did you and Dad split up?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups stop being able to make each other happy, but that doesn't mean we stopped loving you. "Dad said you left us because you didn't want to be a mom anymore," he said quietly. The pain in his voice was a dagger to my heart. I took his hands in mine, looking him in the eyes. "That's not true, Ben. I've always wanted to be your mom, and I always will. Your dad and I see things differently, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Months passed, and our lives began to settle into a new normal. Liam kept his distance, though he occasionally tried to stir up trouble. I learned to ignore his barbs, focusing instead on the precious time I had with my children. Angela remained a source of strength, helping me navigate the legal complexities of co-parenting. One day, as we sat together painting in the backyard, Claire looked up at me and said, "I'm glad we're home, Mom." I smiled, tears threatening to spill over. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Healing wasn't a straight road. Some days felt like triumphs. Moments of laughter, love, and connection that reminded me of what I had fought so hard to reclaim. Other days were harder, filled with the echoes of old wounds and the delicate balancing act of co-parenting with Liam. But through it all, I held on to the promise I had made to myself and my children. I would rebuild our lives, no matter how long it took. The first dinner we shared as a family in our new normal was a small but significant step forward. I cooked spaghetti and meatballs, the kids' favorite, and set the table with the same care I had when they were little. "Mom, can we have garlic bread too?" Sophie asked, her voice filled with excitement. "Of course," I said, smiling as I slid the tray into the oven. The meal wasn't perfect. Claire spilled her drink, Sophie refused to eat her vegetables, and Ben quietly picked at his food. But it was ours. For the first time in months, I felt the warmth of togetherness return to our home. As we cleared the table, Ben surprised me by saying, This was nice, Mom. It feels normal again. His words were a balm to my soul. Claire had always been my creative, spirited child, but the divorce had dulled her spark. Her drawings became darker, filled with muted colors and heavy lines. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the porch, sketching a tree with bare branches. "That's beautiful," I said, sitting beside her. "It's okay," she mumbled, her shoulders slumping. "Do you know what I see?" I asked. "I see strength. Even without leaves, that tree is standing tall. Just like you." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I just don't feel strong anymore, Mom." I hugged her tightly. "You don't have to feel strong every day, sweetheart. But you are, and I'm here to remind you of that whenever you forget." Over time, her drawings began to change. The muted colors gave way to vibrant hues, and the heavy lines softened. Watching her rediscover her confidence was one of the greatest gifts of that year. Ben was the hardest to reach. At 11, he was old enough to understand the complexities of our situation, but too young to process them fully. He carried the weight of the divorce on his small shoulders, trying to protect his sisters while grappling with his own pain. One evening, I found him sitting alone in his room, staring at a photo of all of us from a family vacation. "Can I join you?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. He nodded, still looking at the picture. "I miss when things were like this," he said quietly. "So do I admitted, my throat tightening. "But we can make new memories, Ben. Different, but just as special." He didn't reply, but he leaned into me, letting me wrap an arm around him. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. Sophie, at 8, had the most questions about the changes in our lives. "Why can't Daddy stay for dinner?" she asked one night. "Because Daddy and I live in different houses now," I explained gently. "But that doesn't mean we both don't love you very much. Do you still love Daddy?" The question caught me off guard. I thought carefully before answering. "I love the part of Daddy that gave me you, Claire, and Ben. But sometimes grown-ups love each other in different ways, and it's better for them to live apart." She seemed satisfied with the answer, nodding thoughtfully before diving back into her homework. Recognizing that we all needed help processing our emotions, I enrolled us in family therapy. At first, the sessions were awkward, with the kids reluctant to open up. But over time, the therapist helped us find ways to communicate and heal. Ben learned to express his feelings instead of bottling them up. Claire found her voice, speaking honestly about how the divorce had affected her. Sophie began to understand that the changes in our lives didn't mean she was loved any less, and I learned to forgive myself. Despite our differences, Liam and I began working toward a more amicable co-parenting relationship. It wasn't easy. There were still disagreements and moments of tension, but we both recognized that the children's well-being had to come first. We established a routine, ensuring consistency between our homes. We attended school events together, setting aside our personal grievances for the sake of our children. One evening, after a particularly successful parent-teacher conference, Liam turned to me and said, "You're doing a good job with them." It wasn't an apology or an admission of guilt, but it was the closest thing to peace we'd had in years. As the kids settled into our new life, I began rediscovering who I was outside of being a mother and ex-wife. I took up yoga, joined a book club, and even started painting, something I hadn't done since college. One afternoon, Claire found me working on a canvas in the living room. "Wow, Mom, that's really good," she said, her eyes wide. "Thanks," I said, smiling. "Want to try?" She nodded eagerly, and we spent the rest of the day painting side by side. The house was filled with laughter one Saturday morning as the kids chased each other around the backyard. I watched them from the porch, my heart swelling with gratitude. We weren't the same family we had been before the divorce, but we had found our way back to each other. Ben ran up to me, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, can we have a picnic for lunch?" "Of course," I said, pulling him into a hug. As I watched my children play, I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding the strength to move forward, together. The sound of laughter filled the sunlit kitchen as I poured coffee into 3 mismatched mugs. It was a Saturday morning ritual that had become a cherished tradition over the years. My husband Liam and my best friend Emma were seated at the table, exchanging playful banter as I brought the mugs over. 2 sugars, just the way you like it, I said, placing Emma's mug in front of her. You're a lifesaver, as always, she said with a wink, wrapping her hands around the steaming cup. Liam grinned at me, his blue eyes sparkling. She knows how to keep us both happy. I laughed, brushing off the comment as nothing more than a compliment to my hostess skills. But looking back, I realized there was something in the way he said it. Something I should have noticed. Our life seemed perfect. Liam and I had been married for 7 years, our relationship built on love, trust, and shared dreams. Emma had been my best friend since college, a constant presence through the ups and downs of my life. The 3 of us were inseparable, our bond unshakable. Or so I thought. That day, we planned a picnic at the park. Emma helped me pack sandwiches and snacks while Liam loaded the car. Everything felt light and easy, like it always did when we were together. I don't know what I'd do without you two, I said as we spread out the blanket under a shady oak tree. Emma smiled, her expression warm but unreadable. We're a team, aren't we? I nodded, oblivious to the cracks forming beneath the surface. In hindsight, the changes were so gradual that I barely noticed them. Liam started coming home later from work, blaming meetings that ran overtime. Emma began canceling plans with me more frequently, citing vague excuses about being too busy. At first, I didn't think much of it. Life had a way of getting hectic, and we all had our own responsibilities. But then there were the moments that didn't add up, like the time I called Liam's office and was told he had left hours earlier, or the cryptic text messages Emma quickly hid when I glanced her way. Is everything okay? I asked Emma one evening as we sipped wine on my couch. Of course, she said, her tone too casual. Why wouldn't it be? I shrugged, pushing down the nagging feeling in my chest. I don't know. You've just seemed distant lately. She waved it off with a laugh. Work's been crazy, that's all. You know how it is. I nodded, wanting to believe her. After all, this was Emma, my best friend, my confidant. The first real seed of doubt was planted on an otherwise uneventful Tuesday afternoon. Liam had left early for a business dinner, and Emma had canceled our weekly yoga session, claiming she wasn't feeling well. I was home alone, flipping through a magazine when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an acquaintance, someone I rarely spoke to, followed by a photo. The message read, "Hey, I thought you'd want to know. Isn't this Liam?" My heart stopped. In the picture taken from across a restaurant, Liam sat at a table with a woman whose face I couldn't see clearly, but her long auburn hair was unmistakable. Emma. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they were just grabbing a quick meal. But why wouldn't they tell me? And why had Emma canceled on me? I dialed Liam's number, my hands trembling. The call went straight to voicemail. Next, I tried Emma. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey," she said, her voice soft and slightly hoarse, as if she had been sleeping. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Just checking in. How are you feeling?" "Oh, you know," she replied, letting out a faint sigh. "Still a little under the weather. I'm in bed right now." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "I'm sorry to hear that. Get some rest, okay?" "Thanks, hun. I'll call you tomorrow." As soon as the call ended, a cold wave of realization swept over me. She was lying. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the image in my mind over and over again, trying to make sense of it. Doubts turned into suspicions, and suspicions turned into questions I couldn't ignore. The next day, I decided to test my theory. I called Liam at work. "Hey," I said casually. "How was your dinner last night?" "It was fine," he replied, his tone a little too smooth. Just a long, boring meeting with clients. You wouldn't have enjoyed it. Oh, really? I asked, forcing a smile into my voice. Where did you go? Some steakhouse downtown. I don't even remember the name. I knew he was lying. The following weeks were a blur of quiet observation and gathering evidence. I hated myself for snooping, but I couldn't silence the growing unease in my chest. I checked Liam's phone when he left it unattended, only to find his messages with Emma were suspiciously clean. No banter, no casual updates. Nothing like the friendly exchanges they used to share. Then there was the calendar on his laptop. He always kept a meticulous schedule, but I noticed recurring meetings at odd hours, times that didn't align with his usual work obligations. One Friday evening, when Liam said he had to work late, I decided to follow him. I parked a few blocks away from his office and waited, my stomach twisting with anxiety. Sure enough, an hour later, he emerged from the building. But he wasn't alone. Emma was with him. I watched as they walked down the street together, their heads close, laughing like they shared a secret. They stopped at a small cafe where Liam pulled out a chair for her, his hand lingering on her back just a moment too long. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. My worst fears were no longer fears. They were reality. I didn't confront them that night. Instead, I went home and cried until there were no tears left. My heart was a mix of rage, pain, and disbelief. How could they do this to me? Liam, the man I had promised to love and trust, and Emma, the person I had considered a sister. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound determination. I wouldn't let them continue to deceive me. When Liam came home that evening, I was waiting for him in the living room. Hey, he said, tossing his keys on the table. What's for dinner? We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. He froze, his smile faltering. What's wrong? I held up my phone, displaying the photo from the restaurant. You tell me. For a moment, he said nothing. His face went pale, and I could see the gears turning in his head as he tried to come up with an excuse. It's not what it looks like, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't, I said, cutting him off. Don't lie to me. I saw you with her last night. His eyes widened. You followed me? Don't you dare make this about me, I snapped, my voice rising. How long has this been going on, Liam? How long have you been sleeping with my best friend? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. That night, I called Emma. She didn't deny it either. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice thick with tears. But it did, I replied coldly. And now I have to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life because of you two. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions. Grief, anger, humiliation, and most of all, disbelief. How could my life, which once felt so stable, unravel so completely? Liam had moved out of the house the night I confronted him. He didn't argue when I told him to leave. He just packed a bag and left without saying much. The silence was almost worse than words. I couldn't decide if I wanted him to stay and fight for me or disappear forever. Emma, on the other hand, tried to reach out multiple times. She left voicemails, sent long, apologetic texts, and even showed up at my door once. I didn't answer. Her betrayal stung just as deeply, if not more than Liam's. She had been my closest confidant, the person I trusted most in the world. One night, as I sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen, my phone buzzed. Another message from Emma. I know you hate me, and I deserve it. I just need you to know I never meant to hurt you. Please, let me explain. I threw the phone onto the coffee table, the words blurring through my tears. Explain? What could she possibly say to justify what she'd done? I had spent years sharing my life with her, my secrets, my fears, even my dreams for my future with Liam. And she had taken it all and used it to destroy me. Grieving a betrayal is a strange kind of mourning. It wasn't just the loss of Liam or Emma. It was the loss of the life I thought I had, the version of myself that felt secure, loved, and valued. Some days were better than others. On the good days, I managed to distract myself with work or a long run at the park. On the bad days, I couldn't get out of bed. I replayed every moment that now seemed like a clue, wondering how I could have been so blind. One memory haunted me more than the others. A birthday dinner 2 years ago. Emma had been there, of course, laughing at Liam's jokes and helping me blow out the candles on my cake. That night, as we cleaned up, she had hugged me tightly and said, "You're so lucky to have him." Lucky. Now, I wondered if she had meant it sincerely, or if she had already begun coveting what was mine. A month passed, and I realized I couldn't live like this, trapped in the wreckage of what had been. I needed to rebuild, to reclaim my life on my terms. The first step was therapy. I found a counselor, Dr. Patel, who specialized in helping people navigate betrayal and loss. In our first session, I broke down, spilling every detail of what had happened. "I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore," I admitted, wiping my tears with the tissue she handed me. "That's a normal reaction to betrayal," she said gently. "But you're not defined by what happened to you. You're still here. That means you have the power to redefine yourself." Her words stayed with me. I began to journal, writing down not just my pain, but also my hopes, my goals, and the things I still loved about life. I also started reconnecting with people I had drifted away from over the years. One of those people was Hannah, an old friend from college who had always been a steady presence. When I told her what had happened, she didn't hesitate. "I'm coming over," she said. An hour later, she was at my door with a bottle of wine and a stack of old movies. We stayed up late, talking and laughing in a way I hadn't done in what felt like forever. "You're going to be okay," Hannah said as we clinked glasses. "Better than okay. You'll see." One afternoon, a few weeks later, I received an unexpected email from Emma. The subject line was simple: "Please read this." I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to delete it without a second thought. But another part, the part that still craved closure, needed to know what she had to say. The email was long, filled with apologies and explanations. She admitted that the affair had started during a rough patch in her own life, a time when she felt lonely and insecure. "I was selfish and weak," she wrote. "I know that doesn't excuse what I did. I just want you to know how deeply sorry I am. I miss you, and I miss the friendship we had. If you can ever find it in your heart to forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." I closed the email, my emotions swirling. Forgiveness felt impossible, but I couldn't deny that her words carried a hint of sincerity. In time, I began to feel the weight of the betrayal lifting. Therapy helped, as did the support of friends like Hannah. I threw myself into projects that reignited my sense of purpose. Volunteering, taking up painting, and even planning a solo trip to Italy, something I'd always dreamed of doing. As for Liam and Emma, I didn't reach out to either of them. They were no longer part of my story, and I was finally okay with that. AITA for exposing my husband's affair with his office. Friend to his entire workplace? I have been married to my husband, Liam, for 8 years. We met in college, fell in love, and built a life together. For most of our relationship, I believed we were happy. We had our ups and downs, sure, but nothing that made me doubt his love or loyalty. Liam works in marketing at a mid-sized firm, and his job has always been demanding. Late nights, business trips, and client dinners were all part of the package, and I never questioned it. I trusted him completely. Or at least I used to. Things started to feel off about a year ago when he began mentioning Claire, his coworker, more often. At first, it was innocent. She was new, ambitious, and apparently very good at her job. I even encouraged Liam to mentor her, thinking it was a nice gesture. But soon, her name came up in every conversation. Claire came up with a great idea for the campaign. "Claire's hilarious. She made everyone laugh at lunch. Claire thinks this restaurant is amazing. We should try it." Over time, Liam's behavior changed. He became more distant and irritable at home, spending more time on his phone or locked in his home office. He started working late more often, claiming he had deadlines to meet. But the real red flag came when he abruptly canceled our anniversary dinner because he had to attend a work event. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed something strange. He had shaved and put on his favorite cologne before leaving that night. Liam rarely dressed up for work events, and the small details nagged at me. A week later, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a fancy restaurant, one we'd never been to together. The bill was for two. My suspicions grew, and I decided to do something I'd never done before. Check his phone. While Liam was in the shower, I unlocked his phone using the code I already knew and went through his messages. There it was. Dozens of texts between him and Claire. Flirty emojis, inside jokes, and worst of all, a thread where they planned a weekend getaway. My heart sank as I read Claire's message. "Can't wait to have you all to myself this weekend." I felt sick. My hands trembled as I confronted him the moment he stepped out of the bathroom. "What is this?" I demanded, holding his phone up. Liam's face went pale and he stammered, "It's not what it looks like." I screamed at him, demanding the truth. Finally, he admitted to having an emotional connection with Claire but swore it hadn't gone physical. I didn't believe him. I packed a bag and went to stay with my sister, but I wasn't done. I needed closure. The next day, I hired a private investigator to get to the bottom of things. Within 2 weeks, I had photos of Liam and Claire together at a hotel. Fueled by anger and betrayal, I did something drastic. I emailed the photos and screenshots of their texts to Liam's boss and HR department, exposing their affair. I knew it was petty and vengeful, but I didn't care. If they wanted to ruin my life, I would ruin theirs. The fallout was explosive. Liam was demoted at work, and Claire was transferred to another branch. Liam called me, furious, saying I'd humiliated him and destroyed his career. My in-laws accused me of being vindictive, but my family supported me, saying Liam deserved what he got. Now I'm in the process of filing for divorce. Liam still claims I overreacted and should have handled things privately. Part of me wonders if I went too far by involving his workplace. Did I cross a line, or was I justified in exposing the affair? So, Reddit, AITA for blowing up my husband's affair and sending evidence to his workplace? AITA for being angry at my parents for kicking me out because of my grades? I always thought my parents were strict, but I never imagined they'd go as far as they did last month. I've never been a straight A student, but I've always tried my best. School hasn't been easy for me. Math feels like it's written in an alien language, and history is a blur of dates and events that never stick in my mind. Despite tutoring sessions and late nights, my grades hover around C's and D's. My parents, however, are perfectionists. Both of them excelled academically, and they expect the same from me. Growing up, I was constantly reminded of their achievements. Dad was valedictorian. Mom graduated summa cum laude. "You have our genes," they'd say. "There's no reason you can't be just as successful." Their disappointment grew as my grades stayed mediocre. By the time junior year started, the tension at home was unbearable. Every report card was a battleground, and every parent-teacher conference ended with lectures about how I was wasting my potential. But last month, everything came to a head. After a particularly rough grading period, my parents sat me down at the dining table. Their faces were stone-cold serious. "We've given you every opportunity to succeed," my mom began. "We've paid for tutors, set up study schedules, and tried to help you focus, but nothing is working." My dad chimed in, his tone harsher. "At this point, it's not about ability. It's about effort. If you're not going to take your education seriously, then you need to face the consequences." I blinked at them, confused. "What do you mean, consequences?" Mom took a deep breath. "We've decided that until you can prove you're willing to put in the work, you can't live here anymore." I froze. "What?" "You'll stay with your Aunt Lisa," Dad said, matter-of-factly. "She's agreed to take you in. Maybe some time away from home will help you reset your priorities." I was stunned. "You're kicking me out? Because of my grades?" It's not about the grades, Mom insisted. It's about your attitude. You don't take responsibility for yourself. But I'm trying, I cried. I'm just not good at school. How can you do this to me? Their expressions didn't soften. This is for your own good, Dad said. The next day, I packed my things and moved into Aunt Lisa's small apartment across town. Lisa was sympathetic but firm. Your parents think this will help, she said. Let's make the best of it, okay? Her apartment was cramped and quiet, a far cry from the bustling household I was used to. I missed my room, my bed, my family. Most of all, I missed the sense of security I'd always taken for granted. At school, I tried to keep up appearances, but it wasn't easy. Rumors spread fast. Did you hear her parents kicked her out? Someone whispered in the hallway. They must be so ashamed of her. I started skipping lunch to avoid the stares and snickers. My grades didn't improve. In fact, they got worse. The stress of being uprooted made it even harder to concentrate. One night, after a particularly bad day, I broke down in front of Lisa. Why do they hate me so much? I sobbed. Why can't they just accept me for who I am? Lisa hugged me tightly. They don't hate you, she said. They're just misguided. They think tough love is the answer, but they don't see the damage they're doing. Her words were comforting, but they didn't erase the hurt. A month later, my parents came to visit. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, but seeing them made my anger bubble over. How could you do this to me? I demanded. You abandoned me because I'm not perfect like you want me to be. We didn't abandon you, Mom said defensively. We gave you a wake-up call. No, you gave up on me, I shouted. You made me feel like a failure, like I'm not worth loving unless I meet your ridiculous standards. Dad looked uncomfortable but didn't apologize. We're doing this for your future, he said. One day you'll thank us. I'll never thank you for making me feel like I don't belong in my own home, I shot back. AITA? Now I'm stuck in limbo. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my parents for what they did, but part of me wonders if they're right. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I haven't tried hard enough. So, Reddit. AITA for being angry at my parents for kicking me out because of my grades? Or are they right to think I need this wake-up call? I never thought this would be my story. I remember the moment my world shifted. It wasn't an earthquake or a sudden thunderstorm. It was quiet, almost unassuming, like the world hadn't caught up to the weight of what had just happened. I was sitting in the small, sterile office of a clinic I'd visited a dozen times before. The nurse walked in, her face carefully neutral. That neutrality told me everything before she even opened her mouth. Your test came back positive. Positive. Such a strange word to deliver such devastating news. At first, I couldn't speak. My mind was running 1,000 miles a second, but none of the thoughts made sense. Was it real? Had they made a mistake? Could it really be happening to me? Then, the nurse handed me a pamphlet about living with HIV, and reality hit like a freight train. I walked out of the clinic in a daze, clutching the pamphlet like a lifeline. The world outside was still turning. Cars honking, people laughing, a baby crying. But my world had stopped. Every step I took felt disconnected from the earth, like I was floating in a bubble of shock and disbelief. I got to my car, sat behind the wheel, and stared at nothing for what felt like hours. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. Not my best friend, not my mom, not even the partner I had been dating for 3 months. I was terrified of the stigma, the judgment, the questions. I became a master of pretending. On the outside, I was the same old me, smiling at work, posting goofy selfies, hanging out with friends. But on the inside, I was crumbling. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake replaying every decision, every moment that led me to this point. The guilt was suffocating. Why didn't I insist on protection that one time? Why didn't I get tested sooner? But guilt wasn't going to change anything. It just sat there, heavy and unrelenting, like a stone in my chest. Finally, I forced myself to research. I spent hours online reading articles, watching videos, and joining forums. I learned about antiretroviral therapy, viral loads, and the concept of being undetectable. I read story after story of people living full, vibrant lives with HIV. It gave me hope, but I was still scared. Scared of how people would treat me. Scared of what this meant for my future. Would I ever have a family? Would I ever feel normal again? The day I told my mom was one of the hardest of my life. I sat her down, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own words. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you say anything. Her face softened with concern. Of course, sweetheart. When I told her, her eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't pull away. She hugged me, held me like she did when I was a kid, and said, "We'll get through this together." The relief was overwhelming. I wasn't alone anymore. Over time, I told my close friends and my partner. Some took it better than others, but I was prepared for that. The ones who stayed proved to me that real love, whether romantic or platonic, doesn't falter in the face of adversity. My partner and I had a long, honest conversation about what this meant for us. They asked questions, did their own research, and stood by me. That's when I knew they were someone truly special. Starting treatment felt like crossing a threshold. The first pill I took was a symbol of control, of taking my life back from fear and uncertainty. The doctors reassured me that with medication, my viral load would become undetectable, meaning I couldn't transmit the virus to anyone else. Those words were like a balm to my soul. I joined an online support group not long after. At first, I just lurked, reading other people's stories and soaking in their strength. There was one story, in particular, that stuck with me. A man in his 40s who had been living with HIV for over 20 years. He talked about his career, his husband, their kids. It was the first time I really believed that my life could still be everything I'd dreamed of. Now, a year later, I'm on medication and undetectable. My health is good, and my outlook on life has shifted. I've learned to let go of shame and embrace my humanity. I've met incredible people who remind me every day that I'm not defined by my diagnosis. In some ways, I've become stronger, resilient, more empathetic. One unexpected thing this journey has taught me is the power of vulnerability. Sharing my story has been terrifying, but it's also been healing. The more I open up, the more I realize how many people are carrying their own burdens in silence. HIV isn't a death sentence. It's not the end of my story. If anything, it's a new chapter, one where I'm learning to live more fully, more authentically. To anyone out there struggling with a similar diagnosis, I want you to know this. You're not alone. It's okay to feel scared, angry, or even hopeless at times. But there's a whole community of people who understand, who care, and who will support you. You are not your diagnosis. You are so much more than that. And if you're still in that quiet, sterile office, clutching your own pamphlet and feeling like your world has stopped, remember, the world hasn't. It's still turning. And so are you. AITA for leaving my friend behind. When she was bitten by a snake during our island vacation, I have been friends with Julia since high school. We've always been close, though our friendship isn't without its bumps. Julia is the adventurous type, always pushing me out of my comfort zone, while I'm more cautious and reserved. When she suggested we take a girls' trip to a remote tropical island, I was hesitant. Julia had found the destination through a travel blog, a hidden gem with pristine beaches, lush forests, and barely any tourists. It sounded idyllic, but the isolation worried me. There was no hospital nearby, no cell service, and we'd have to rely on a local guide to get around. Julia brushed off my concerns, saying, "Come on, live a little. It'll be an adventure." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The first few days were everything Julia promised. Sunset swims, hiking through untouched trails, and lounging on empty beaches. We stayed in a small, rustic cabin with a local guide, Marco, who was friendly but blunt about the dangers of the island. "You have to watch your step in the forest," he warned. "There are venomous snakes here. If you're bitten, you'll need anti-venom immediately." Julia laughed it off. "What are the odds?" she said. "We'll be fine." On the fourth day, Julia wanted to explore a secluded part of the island that Marco had explicitly advised against. "That area's too risky," he said. "The terrain is rough and the snakes are more common there." But Julia was insistent. "We came all this way to explore, not sit around," she said, rolling her eyes at Marco's warnings. "If you're scared, you can stay behind," she added, directing the comment at me. Feeling pressured, I reluctantly agreed. The hike was grueling, with overgrown paths and uneven terrain. I was on edge the entire time, scanning every step for movement. Julia, on the other hand, was carefree, snapping photos and laughing at my paranoia. Then it happened. I heard Julia scream, a blood-curdling sound that sent chills down my spine. I turned to see her clutching her leg, a small snake slithering away into the underbrush. Her face was pale and tears streamed down her cheeks. "I think it bit me," she cried. I froze, my mind racing. Marco's warnings about the venom echoed in my head. I ran to her side, trying to stay calm. The bite mark was already swelling, and Julia's breathing was shallow. "We need to get back," I said, my voice trembling. Julia nodded weakly, but the trek back was agonizingly slow. She could barely walk, and every step seemed to drain her strength. I tried to support her, but the dense forest and her increasing weight made it almost impossible. At one point, she collapsed, unable to go any further. "I can't," she gasped. "I need help." I was faced with an impossible choice: stay with Julia and risk both of us being stranded or leave her to get help. "I'll go get Marco," I said, my heart pounding. "I'll be back as fast as I can." "No, don't leave me," Julia pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. Tears streamed down my face as I promised her I'd return quickly. "You'll be okay," I lied, knowing full well I had no idea how much time she had. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, my lungs burning and my legs aching. The guilt of leaving her behind clawed at me with every step. By the time I reached Marco, I was sobbing and barely coherent. He grabbed medical supplies and we sprinted back to Julia. When we found her, she was semi-conscious, her face pale and her body trembling. Marco acted quickly, administering first aid and carrying her back to the cabin. We radioed for emergency help, but it took hours for a boat to arrive. By the time Julia reached the mainland hospital, she was in critical condition. Julia survived, but the venom had caused lasting damage. She was furious with me for leaving her. "You abandoned me," she said when I visited her in the hospital. "I begged you not to go, and you did anyway." I tried to explain my reasoning, but she wouldn't hear it. "You cared more about saving yourself than staying with me," she snapped. "Our friends are divided. Some say I did the right thing by getting help, while others agree with Julia, saying I should have stayed with her no matter what. Now, Julia refuses to speak to me, and I'm left questioning whether I made the right choice. The house that holds me. The night everything changed started with silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence. The heavy, foreboding kind, like the calm before a storm. I was sitting at the dining table, finishing homework I didn't really care about, while my parents were out for their usual Friday night dinner date. They always went to the same Italian restaurant. Always ordered the same thing: chicken Alfredo for Dad, lasagna for Mom. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. When the knock came at the door, I remember feeling annoyed. It was 10 p.m. Who knocks at this hour? I opened the door to see two police officers standing there, their expressions somber. I knew something was wrong before they even spoke. "Are you—" The officer paused to glance at his notepad. "Jason Carter?" I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "There's been an accident," he said. "Your parents—" He hesitated, as if saying it out loud would make it worse. "I'm sorry, son. They didn't make it." For a moment, I felt nothing. No tears, no panic. Just a hollow, echoing numbness. I wanted to slam the door, as if shutting them out would make it untrue. But I didn't. I stood there, staring at them until one of the officers gently asked if there was someone they could call for me. There wasn't. I was 16, and my parents were gone. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of funeral arrangements, casseroles from neighbors, and pitying glances from people I barely knew. Everyone kept saying, "If you need anything, just let us know." But I never knew what to ask for. What could I ask for? Could they bring my parents back? Could they make the empty house feel less suffocating? After the funeral, it hit me. This was it. No aunts or uncles to take me in, no siblings to lean on. Just me and the big empty house my parents had left behind. For weeks, I avoided their bedroom. It felt sacred, like stepping inside would disturb the last traces of their presence. But one night, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence of the house was crushing, and I found myself standing in their doorway. Their room was exactly as they'd left it. Mom's scarf draped over a chair, Dad's reading glasses on the nightstand. I sat on their bed, burying my face in Mom's pillow. It still smelled like her, like lavender and the faint scent of her favorite lotion. That's when the tears finally came. Weeks' worth of bottled-up grief spilling out in a torrent. I cried until I couldn't anymore. And then, for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of calm. Like they were still with me somehow. Living alone at 16 was like learning to swim by being thrown into the deep end. The bills, the groceries, the laundry, it all piled up. I burned dinner more times than I cared to admit. I forgot to take out the trash, ran out of shampoo, and once left the stove on all night. School became my escape. It was the one place where I didn't have to think about the empty house waiting for me. But even there, I couldn't escape the whispers. That's the kid whose parents died. Do you think he's okay? I heard he's living alone. The pity in their eyes was worse than the whispers. I didn't want to be the poor kid or the tragic story. I just wanted to be normal. But nothing about my life was normal anymore. One afternoon, as I was rummaging through the attic for some of my mom's old paperwork, I found a box labeled Jason's Memories. Inside were things I hadn't seen in years. Baby pictures, crayon drawings, birthday cards. At the very bottom was a journal. It wasn't mine. It was my mom's. I hesitated before opening it, feeling like I was intruding. But curiosity won. The entries were filled with stories about me. My first steps, my first word, my first day of school. She wrote about how proud she was of me, how she believed I could handle anything life threw at me. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before the accident. Jason is growing up so fast. I can't believe he's already 16. I know he doesn't need me as much as he used to, but I hope he always remembers how much we love him. He's stronger than he knows. I clutched the journal to my chest, tears streaming down my face. For the first time, I felt something other than grief. I felt a responsibility, not just to survive, but to live the life my parents believed I could. The next few months were hard, but I found a rhythm. I got a part-time job at a diner after school to help cover expenses. My boss, a gruff man named Pete, became an unlikely mentor. He never said much, but he always left a plate of food for me after my shift. And once, when I accidentally burned my hand, he muttered, "You're tougher than you look, kid." Slowly, the house began to feel less like a tomb and more like a home again. I hung up pictures of my parents, their smiles a constant reminder of what I was working for. Now, a year later, I'm still figuring things out. I won't lie and say it's easy. It's not. There are days when the loneliness feels unbearable, when I'd give anything to hear my mom's laugh or watch a game with my dad. But I've learned that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you carry. And while it's heavy, it's also a reminder of how much they loved me, and how much I loved them. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. Life doesn't stop when you lose someone. It feels like it should. It feels like the world should come to a screeching halt. But it doesn't. And maybe that's a good thing. Because as long as the world keeps turning, there's always a chance to keep going, to keep living, and to keep finding moments of joy, even in the midst of sorrow. And so I do. AITA for blaming my family after my dog died in my hands. Rocky came into my life 8 years ago when I was struggling to find my footing in the world. I had just moved out of my childhood home, started a new job in a city where I didn't know anyone, and was battling a deep sense of loneliness. He was a golden retriever puppy I found at a local shelter, the runt of the litter, with floppy ears and eyes full of curiosity. I knew the moment we locked eyes that we belonged together. Rocky was more than a pet. He was my lifeline. Through breakups, job losses, and long, lonely nights, he was always there. A constant source of joy and unconditional love. When I felt like I had no one else in the world, he reminded me I wasn't truly alone. He would nuzzle my hand when I cried, wag his tail every time I came home, and curl up by my side when I couldn't sleep. I'd tell him, "You're my best friend, Rocky." And he'd wag his tail as if he understood every word. My family, however, never quite understood our bond. My mom referred to him as just a dog, while my younger brother Matt liked to tease me for treating Rocky like a child. I'd learned to brush off their comments over the years, but deep down, their lack of empathy for how much Rocky meant to me always stung. Last month, my parents invited me to a family barbecue. It was meant to be a casual get-together. Burgers on the grill, beers on the patio, and my mom's famous potato salad. "Why don't you bring Rocky this time?" my mom suggested. "It'll be good for him to stretch his legs." I hesitated. Their backyard wasn't fenced, and I always worried about Rocky's safety. But my mom insisted, and eventually I gave in. "Okay," I said, "but only if everyone keeps an eye on him." The day started off well. Rocky was thrilled to be out in the open, sniffing every blade of grass and wagging his tail like crazy. My brother Matt, who had always been indifferent to Rocky, offered to play fetch with him. "He needs to burn off some energy," he said. I handed him Rocky's favorite ball, warning him to stay within the yard. "No streets," I added firmly. But less than 10 minutes later, I heard a sharp yelp. My heart dropped. I turned to see Rocky lying motionless by the curb, Matt frozen in place with the ball still in his hand. "What happened?" I screamed as I ran to Rocky. "I didn't think he'd run that far," Matt stammered, his face pale. When I reached Rocky, he was still alive but barely breathing. Blood stained his golden fur, and his eyes, which were always so full of life, were dull and unfocused. "Rocky, stay with me," I whispered, cradling him in my arms. "Please, you're going to be okay." I screamed for someone to call a vet, but my mom's voice cut through the chaos. "There's no time, honey. He's gone." "No, don't say that," I snapped, tears streaming down my face. Rocky's breathing grew shallower until finally he exhaled one last time. I felt the life leave his body, and my entire world shattered. I sat there in the middle of the street, sobbing uncontrollably and holding him close, unwilling to let him go. The drive home that night was unbearable. I refused to leave Rocky's side until my dad gently pried him from my arms and promised to take care of him. I barely slept, haunted by the memory of his last moments. Every corner of my apartment reminded me of him. His leash by the door, his favorite toy on the couch, the empty bed in the corner of my room. When I tried to talk to my family about how I was feeling, their responses only deepened my grief. My mom said, "It was an accident. You can't blame Matt." My sister Emily suggested I get another dog, as if Rocky were replaceable. And Matt? He avoided me altogether. A week later, my mom called and asked why I wasn't returning anyone's messages. "You're being dramatic," she said. "It's not like this was anyone's fault." I couldn't hold back anymore. "It was Matt's fault," I yelled. "I told him to keep Rocky away from the street, and he didn't listen. Rocky is dead because he didn't listen." "It was an accident," she repeated, her tone sharp. "You can't hold this against him forever." But I could, and I did, because to me it wasn't just an accident. It was carelessness, and it cost me the most important thing in my life. In the weeks that followed, I pulled away from my family entirely. I ignored their calls and skipped family dinners. My friends tried to comfort me, but most of them didn't understand the depth of my grief. "He was just a dog," one friend said. and I never spoke to her again. I started seeing a therapist who told me it was normal to feel this way. Rocky was a part of your life for years, she said. Losing him is like losing a family member. Months later, my mom reached out again, this time with a heartfelt message. "We miss you," she wrote. "Please don't let this tragedy tear us apart." I thought about it for days. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to move on and repair our fractured relationship. But another part of me, the part still reeling from the loss of Rocky, wasn't ready. In the end, I wrote her back. "I need more time," I said. "I'm not ready to forgive, but I'm also not ready to let go of you completely." Healing is a slow process. I've started volunteering at an animal shelter in Rocky's honor, helping dogs find loving homes. I've even thought about adopting again, though no dog could ever replace him. As for my family, I've begun to rebuild those relationships, piece by piece. We've talked about what happened that day, and while I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive Matt, I'm learning to let go of some of my anger. Rocky will always be a part of me. And though his loss broke my heart, his love continues to guide me every day. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for blaming my family after my dog died in my hands? Or was my anger justified? I'll never forget Rocky, and I'll always wonder if I could have done more to protect him. But at the end of the day, I'm just trying to heal. ITA for exposing my mother's secret that tore our family apart? When I first decided to move back to my hometown after nearly a decade away, I thought it would be a fresh start. I was wrong. What I walked into wasn't just a family reunion, it was a minefield of secrets waiting to explode. For context, my family has always been complicated. My mom, Susan, has a commanding personality. She's the glue of the family, but also the enforcer. Growing up, I admired her strength, but feared her wrath. My dad, Tom, is her polar opposite. Quiet, kind, and a little absent-minded. Then there's my older brother, Eric, the golden child, and my younger sister, Sophie, the wild card. I was always the mediator, the one who smoothed things over. But this time, there was no smoothing over what I found out. It all started innocently enough. While unpacking in my childhood room, I stumbled upon a box of old family photos in the attic. Tucked between the albums was a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened them. The letters were addressed to my mom from someone named Mark. At first, they seemed harmless. Old correspondence from a friend, maybe a coworker. But the deeper I read, the more my stomach dropped. Mark wasn't just a friend. The letters dated back 30 years, and they made it clear that Mark and my mom had been in love. Deeply. What shook me most wasn't just the affair. It was the timeline. According to the dates, the affair happened around the time Eric was conceived. The letters included phrases like, "I can't wait to see our son grow up," and "He has your eyes, but I hope he gets my sense of humor." I felt sick. Was Eric even my dad's biological child? I sat on this information for weeks, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to blow up our family, but I couldn't look at my mom the same way. Every family dinner, every interaction felt tainted by this shadow looming over us. The breaking point came during a family BBQ when my mom made a passive-aggressive comment about my life choices. Something about how I was always running away from responsibilities. It struck a nerve and I snapped. I said, maybe if I had a role model who didn't lie to everyone's face, I'd have turned out differently. The room went silent. My mom's face turned pale. I hadn't planned to spill the secret then and there, but anger got the better of me. I blurted out everything. The letters, the affair, the doubts about Eric's paternity. My dad looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Eric stormed out without a word, and Sophie just kept saying, "Oh my God." The family imploded. My dad demanded answers from my mom, who admitted to the affair but insisted she was sure Eric was his son. Eric refused to speak to anyone until he took a DNA test, which confirmed what we all feared. He wasn't biologically my dad's child. Eric spiraled, cutting contact with my mom entirely. My dad, heartbroken but unable to leave after 30 years of marriage, retreated into himself. Sophie, who had always idolized our mom, started questioning everything about her own childhood. And me? I was labeled the villain for airing the dirty laundry. My mom insists I'm the one who destroyed the family, saying, "If you hadn't said anything, we could have been fine." But I can't shake the feeling that this secret was bound to come out eventually. AITA for burning the car. When I tell people what happened, their reactions are always the same: disbelief. How could you? Why would you do something so dramatic? The truth is, it wasn't just about the car. The car was the final straw in a lifetime of feeling dismissed, overshadowed, and unimportant. Here's the full story. You decide if I'm the asshole. I'm the middle child of 3 siblings. My dad, Rick, has always been the larger-than-life figure in our family. He's a successful businessman, the kind of guy who prides himself on hard work and achievements. My mom, Karen, is more of a peacekeeper. She avoids conflict like the plague, which has allowed my dad to dominate every decision in the family. My older brother, Liam, is the golden child. Star athlete in high school, now on his way to law school, my dad can't stop bragging about him. My younger sister, Emily, is the baby of the family and spoiled rotten. And me? I'm the problem child. It's not that I try to cause trouble. It's just that nothing I do is ever good enough for my dad. I'm not as smart as Liam or as sweet as Emily. I barely graduated high school, and I'm currently working part-time while figuring out my future. Last week, on my 19th birthday, my dad handed me the keys to a car. It was a 2007 Toyota Corolla. Silver, scratched up, with 150,000 miles on it. Now, before you roll your eyes and think I'm ungrateful, let me explain. My dad had made a huge deal about this car for months. "Wait until you see what I'm getting you," he'd say. "You're gonna love it. It's a real step up for you." So, when I saw the beat-up Corolla, I felt insulted. It wasn't just that the car was old. It was that Liam had gotten a brand new Honda Civic for his 19th birthday, and Emily, at 16, was already driving a newer model than mine. I didn't say anything at first. I smiled, thanked him, and drove the car home. But the longer I sat with it, the angrier I got. Why was I always the afterthought? Why was I always given scraps while my siblings got the best? The breaking point came the day after my birthday. My dad was hosting a barbecue, and a bunch of his friends and coworkers came over. During the party, he pointed out my new car to his buddies. "Look at that beauty," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Got it for a steal. Perfect for a kid like him. Something reliable that won't give him any trouble." One of his friends laughed and said, "Rick, you're spoiling him. My kid got a bike for his first ride." They all laughed, and my dad grinned like he'd just won a prize. I stood there, humiliated. I felt like he wasn't giving me a car to help me. He was doing it to prove something to his friends. That night, after everyone had left, I sat in the driveway staring at the Corolla. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like a symbol of everything wrong with my relationship with my dad. I don't know what came over me, but I grabbed a can of lighter fluid from the garage, poured it over the hood, and lit a match. Watching the flames engulf the car was both terrifying and cathartic. For a brief moment, I felt in control, but reality hit fast. The neighbors called the fire department, my parents came running outside, and chaos erupted. My dad was furious. He yelled until he was red in the face, calling me ungrateful and reckless. My mom cried, begging me to explain why I would do such a thing. Emily recorded the whole thing on her phone, probably for Snapchat. The police showed up, but since it was technically my car, they didn't arrest me. My dad, however, was done. He told me I was out of the house by the end of the week. Now, a week later, I'm living on my friend's couch, trying to piece everything together. Was it stupid to burn the car? Absolutely. I know that. But it wasn't just about the car. It was about years of feeling like I didn't matter. I've tried reaching out to my dad to apologize, but he won't respond. My mom says I need to give him time, but I'm not sure he'll ever forgive me. Liam thinks I'm insane, and Emily keeps sending me memes about midlife crises at 19. So, Reddit, am I the asshole? Am I AITA for confronting my husband? After discovering his best friend is his lover, I have been married to my husband Mark for 8 years. We have 2 children, Lily and Ben. Mark is a great dad, and until recently, I thought he was the perfect husband too. But over the past few months, I've been feeling like something's off. Mark has always been close with his best friend, Jason. They met in college, and their bond has always been strong. Jason is a constant presence in our lives. He joins us for holidays, babysits the kids when needed, and even helped us move into our current home. I've always appreciated him, but lately I've started noticing things that make me question everything. It started with small things. Mark spends more time texting Jason than me. Their guy trips have become more frequent, lasting longer than before. Jason once casually mentioned a restaurant Mark took him to, a place I'd been begging Mark to go to for years, but he always claimed he wasn't interested. Then, a few weeks ago, Mark's phone buzzed late at night while he was in the shower. I wasn't snooping, but the preview on the lock screen caught my eye. It was a message from Jason. I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. My heart dropped. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't confront Mark immediately. Instead, I decided to dig deeper. I know that might make me the AH, but I needed to be sure before jumping to conclusions. I accessed Mark's email account. He uses the same password for everything, and found a series of exchanged messages with Jason. What I read confirmed my worst fears. Their relationship wasn't just emotional. It was physical, intimate, and had been going on for nearly a year. There were messages where they reminisced about their first time together, how they couldn't keep hiding, and how hard it was for them to pretend in front of me and the kids. Jason had even written, I wish I could be the one to tuck them in at night with you. I was devastated. After sitting on this for days, I decided to confront Mark. I waited until the kids were asleep and told him we needed to talk. Mark, is there something you want to tell me about Jason? I asked. He froze. It was like every ounce of blood drained from his face. What do you mean? He stammered. I mean, I said, holding back tears. I know about you two. I know you've been lying to me. Mark didn't deny it. Instead, he broke down, admitting everything. He told me he never planned for this to happen, but his feelings for Jason had grown over the years. He said he still loved me, but he wasn't sure how to reconcile the two halves of his life. I didn't want to hurt you, he said, or the kids, but I can't ignore how I feel about Jason. I was angry, heartbroken, and confused. I asked him why he didn't just tell me if he was questioning his sexuality. He said he was scared of losing his family, scared of what people would think, and, frankly, scared of admitting the truth to himself. Now, I'm left trying to pick up the pieces. I've asked Mark to move out temporarily so I can process everything. Jason, to his credit, has stayed away, though Mark admitted he's been pressuring him to make a choice. My family and friends are split. Some say Mark is the AH for lying to me and betraying our marriage vows. Others say I should show compassion because he's grappling with his identity. A few have even suggested I'm the AH for invading his privacy, as if his lies and betrayal are somehow justified. I'm trying to figure out what's best for me and my kids. I don't hate Mark, but I don't think I can ever trust him again. So, Reddit, AETA for confronting my husband and asking him to leave after discovering he's been having an affair with his best friend. I never thought I'd spend my 18th birthday in the parking lot of a Walmart. But here I am, sitting in the back seat of our rusty old minivan, watching as my little brother tries to do his homework by the light of a gas station flashlight. My parents are in the front seat, arguing in hushed tones. This isn't how life was supposed to go. A year ago, we lived in a nice house in the suburbs. I had my own room, a part-time job at a coffee shop, and dreams of going to college. Now we're homeless, and all those dreams feel like a cruel joke. I want to hate my parents for what happened. Sometimes I think I do. But then I see my mom crying quietly when she thinks no one's watching, or my dad staring blankly at the dashboard, and I feel guilty. They're struggling too. We all are. But does that excuse what they did? A year ago, we were what you'd call comfortably middle class. My dad, Steve, worked in real estate, flipping houses and making what he called smart investments. My mom, Linda, was a stay at home mom who prided herself on keeping a perfect home. My little brother, Josh, was a nerdy, awkward 13-year-old who spent most of his time playing video games. And me? I was the overachiever. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Family vacations every summer, a new car every few years, dinners out at fancy restaurants to celebrate birthdays. My parents always said we were living the dream. But looking back, I realized the cracks were already there. It started small. My dad stopped coming home at his usual time, saying he was working late on big deals. My mom would tell us not to worry, but I could see the tension in her face. Then the late-night phone calls started. My dad would step outside to take them, his voice low and urgent. When I finally worked up the courage to ask what was going on, my dad brushed it off. "Just a rough patch," he said. "Nothing to worry about." But then the rough patch turned into overdue bills, final notices, and debt collectors knocking on our door. My dad's big deal had fallen through, and he'd poured every penny we had into it. Worse, he'd taken out loans he couldn't repay. I'll never forget the day the bank repossessed our house. My mom cried in the driveway as the movers carried out our furniture. My dad just stood there, staring at the ground. We moved into a motel, using what little money we had left. It was cramped, noisy, and depressing, but at least it was a roof over our heads. My parents kept promising it was temporary. "Just a few weeks," they said. "We'll get back on our feet." But the weeks turned into months, and things only got worse. My dad couldn't find steady work, and my mom's attempts to sell homemade crafts barely made enough to cover food. Eventually, we couldn't afford the motel anymore. That's when we started living in the minivan. The first time I confronted my parents, it didn't go well. "You lied to us," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You kept saying everything was fine, and now look at us." My dad exploded. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I'm not trying?" "Trying?" I shot back. "You gambled everything we had on a stupid deal, and now we're homeless." My mom tried to mediate, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. She knew I was right. As the weeks dragged on, I realized I had two choices: keep blaming my parents or start figuring out how to survive. I got a job at a diner, working the graveyard shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. I started saving what little I could, dreaming of the day I could leave and start fresh. But every time I looked at my little brother, I felt torn. He needed me. My parents needed me. Could I really just walk away? The final straw came when I found out my dad had borrowed money from a friend without telling anyone. The friend showed up at our home, a parking lot, demanding repayment. My dad had nothing to give him. I lost it. "You haven't learned anything, have you? You're still making the same stupid mistakes." My dad looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I was trying to fix it. For you. For all of us." Now, here I am, sitting in this parking lot trying to make sense of everything. I want to believe we'll get through this. I want to believe my parents can change. But I'm not sure I can keep carrying the weight of their mistakes. So, Reddit, AITA, for blaming them. It started as an ordinary evening. Josh and Lila were lounging on the couch in their cozy apartment, surrounded by the faint hum of the city beyond their windows. Lila's baby bump was visible beneath her oversized sweatshirt, a constant reminder of the life they were about to bring into the world. Josh felt a sense of peace, knowing they were building a future together. But peace can be fragile. Josh glanced over at Lila, who was scrolling through her phone, her expression unusually focused. She rarely let herself get drawn into her phone when they were together, a habit Josh always appreciated. But tonight, something was different. "Everything okay?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Lila looked up, startled, as if she had forgotten he was there. "Yeah, just catching up on some old messages." Josh nodded, but a flicker of unease settled in his chest. He trusted Lila, but his mind couldn't help but wander. They had been through so much together. The ups and downs of their relationship, the joy of discovering the pregnancy, the plans for their future. He shook off the feeling, reminding himself that trust was the foundation of their love. Later that night, as Lila slept beside him, her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. Normally, Josh wouldn't have thought twice about it, but tonight, curiosity got the better of him. He reached for the phone, the screen lighting up with a notification. It was a message from someone named Kyle. Josh's heart sank. He knew that name all too well. Kyle was Lila's ex, the one she had been with for years before they met. The one she had described as a chapter closed. His hands trembled as he read the preview of the message. "It's been a while, but I'm glad you reached out. I've been thinking about you too." The world seemed to tilt as Josh processed the words. He knew he shouldn't invade Lila's privacy further, but the pit in his stomach demanded answers. He unlocked her phone, guilt warring with the need for clarity. The conversation thread revealed a storm brewing. Lila had initiated contact. A simple, "Hey, hope you're doing well," that had spiraled into reminiscing about their past. It wasn't overtly romantic, but there was an intimacy in their words that made Josh's chest ache. And then the bombshell. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed together, especially now that I'm going to be a mom." Josh's mind raced. Did Lila regret their life together? Was she second-guessing their relationship, their future, their child? The next morning, Josh confronted her. "Lila, we need to talk. I saw your messages with Kyle." Her face paled. "You went through my phone?" "I did," he admitted. "And I'm sorry for invading your privacy, but I need to understand why you reached out to him. Are you having doubts about us?" Tears welled in Lila's eyes. "I'm not doubting us, Josh. I'm scared. Becoming a parent is overwhelming, and I guess part of me was looking for closure. Or maybe reassurance that I'm not walking into this next chapter with unresolved baggage." "And did you find what you were looking for?" Josh's voice was steady, but his heart was anything but. Lila hesitated. "I realized something important. My past with Kyle is just that. The past. What we have, Josh, it's real. It's messy and beautiful and imperfect, but it's ours. I'm sorry for opening old wounds. I never meant to hurt you." Josh exhaled deeply, the tension in his chest loosening ever so slightly. "We're about to start a family, Lila. I need to know that you're all in, that you're not looking back." "I am," she said, her voice firm. "I promise you, Josh. I'm all in." The road to rebuilding trust wasn't easy. They sought therapy, learning to communicate more openly and navigate their insecurities together. Slowly, they found their way back to each other, stronger for having faced the storm. Months later, as they held their newborn daughter for the first time, Josh looked at Lila and saw not the woman who had texted her ex, but the partner who had chosen to stand by him, to grow with him, to build a life with him. Sometimes, love isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about how you heal from them together. When my best friend Anna invited me on a weekend trip to the Palisades in Los Angeles, I jumped at the chance. Anna had just inherited her late grandmother's house, a sprawling, mid-century modern tucked away in the hills. She described it as a dream escape, complete with panoramic views of the ocean, vintage decor, and a sprawling backyard that backed up to Topanga State Park. "Think of it as a getaway before life gets crazy again," she'd said, her voice tinged with excitement. I didn't hesitate. The Palisades sounded like paradise compared to the chaos of downtown LA. Plus, Anna and I had been friends since college, and it felt like old times to take a spontaneous road trip together. But what she didn't tell me, what I wouldn't learn until much later, was that the house had a history. A dark, unsettling history that the locals refused to talk about. The drive up to the Palisades was beautiful. As we wound through narrow roads lined with towering eucalyptus trees, the city faded behind us. By the time we reached Anna's grandmother's house, the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the hills. The house was exactly as Anna had described, a stunning architectural masterpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows and clean lines, but something about it felt off. The windows seemed too large, almost like eyes staring out at the surrounding wilderness, and the shadows cast by the trees seemed to stretch unnaturally long, as if reaching for the house itself. "It's beautiful, right?" Anna said, grinning as she unlocked the front door. I nodded, not wanting to ruin her excitement. But as we stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. The air felt heavy, and the faint scent of lavender mixed with something metallic lingered in the entryway. The first night was uneventful. We unpacked, cooked dinner, and sat on the patio, sipping wine as the distant sound of waves lulled us into a sense of calm. But everything changed the next morning. While exploring the house, I found a leather-bound journal tucked away in a drawer in the study. The pages were filled with neat, spidery handwriting, and each entry was dated between 1957 and 1962. "Check this out," I said, showing it to Anna. She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to unease. "This was my grandmother's handwriting," she said softly. The entries started innocently enough. Notes about dinner parties, gardening tips, and visits from friends. But as we read further, the tone shifted. April 15th, 1960. "The shadows are back. They linger by the windows at night, watching. I told Robert, but he says I'm imagining things. I'm not. I can feel them. June 3rd, 1960. Something is wrong with the garden. The roses are wilting, even though I water them every day. And last night I heard whispers. They were faint but unmistakable. Am I losing my mind?" Anna slammed the journal shut. "It's just old lady paranoia," she said, laughing nervously. "Right?" But I could tell she wasn't convinced. Neither was I. That night, the house felt different. The comforting hum of cicadas was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. As we sat in the living room, the sound of faint whispers filled the air. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Anna froze, her eyes darting around the room. "It's just the wind," she said, though her voice wavered. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, faint voices overlapping in a language I couldn't understand. We searched the house, trying to find the source, but the moment we entered a room, the whispers would stop. It was as if they were playing with us. By the third night, neither of us had slept much. The whispers came and went, always just loud enough to unsettle us, but never clear enough to decipher. That night, I woke to a sound like fingernails tapping against glass. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw a shadow move across the window. It was tall and slender, with unnaturally long limbs. "Anna?" I whispered, shaking her awake. She groaned, but when she saw the shadow, her eyes widened in terror. "Close the curtains," she whispered. I rushed to the window, but before I could pull the curtains shut, the shadow darted away. Impossibly fast, almost like it had dissolved into the night. The next morning, we decided to leave. But as we packed, Anna found a door in the hallway we hadn't noticed before. It led to the basement. "I don't remember this being here," she said, frowning. The air grew colder as we descended the stairs, the faint smell of decay growing stronger. At the bottom of the staircase was a small, dimly lit room. The walls were covered in strange symbols etched into the plaster, and in the center of the room was a small wooden box. Anna hesitated, but curiosity got the better of her. She opened the box, revealing a collection of black and white photographs. The photos showed the house in various stages of construction. But in every photo, there was a figure in the background, a shadowy figure with glowing eyes. As soon as we left the basement, the house seemed to come alive. The whispers grew deafening, and the shadows stretched and twisted, forming shapes that seemed to reach for us. We grabbed our bags and ran, barely pausing to lock the door behind us. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the shadowy figure standing in the driveway, watching us leave. We never went back to the house. Anna sold it a few months later, though she never told the buyers about the whispers or the shadows. Sometimes I still dream about that house, about the symbols in the basement and the figure in the photographs. I wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I can hear whispers in the darkness. Anna refuses to talk about what happened, but I know she remembers. How could she forget? She cheated, but wants to stay together. A journey through chaos and reflection. I never thought I'd be one of those guys. The ones who pour their hearts out online because they can't make sense of their own lives. But here I am, typing into the void, trying to find clarity. Her name is Mia. We've been together for 4 years, and it wasn't just a relationship. It was a partnership. We moved in together after 2 years, adopted a dog named Scout, and spent countless weekends planning our future. Marriage was a distant but certain goal, or so I thought. The signs were there if I had cared to look closely. Subtle changes in her behavior. Her phone always glued to her hand, new clothes she bought just because, and late nights at work that didn't align with her usual schedule. I chalked it up to stress or her need for space. Everyone has their phases, right? The truth came out on a Sunday evening. We had just returned from a weekend getaway, one I planned to rekindle the spark I felt was dimming. While unpacking, her phone buzzed with a text. Normally, I wouldn't care. We've always trusted each other. But this time, her reaction was off. She quickly grabbed the phone, her face pale. Call it intuition or a gut punch from the universe, but I asked to see the phone. At first, she refused, claiming it was a work thing. I didn't push, but later that night when she went to shower, curiosity got the better of me. I hate myself for snooping, but I did it anyway. There it was, a string of texts with a coworker named Eric. Explicit, emotional, and undeniable. They'd been seeing each other for months. The casual mentions of late meetings were actually rendezvous at his apartment. Every word felt like a dagger. When she came out of the bathroom, I confronted her. At first, she tried to deny it, but when I quoted one of the texts verbatim, she broke down. There were tears, apologies, and explanations I didn't want to hear. She said she was confused, that our relationship had felt stagnant, and Eric was just a distraction. She swore she still loved me and begged for a chance to fix things. I felt every emotion at once: rage, betrayal, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of inadequacy. Was I not enough? Was there something I missed? I told her I needed space and left the apartment to crash at my best friend's place. The next few weeks were a blur. Mia texted and called constantly, promising it was over with Eric and that she wanted to rebuild our relationship. My friends were split. Half told me to run. The other half said every relationship faces trials, and it's up to me to decide if it's worth saving. I went to therapy, hoping for some clarity. My therapist asked the hard questions. Did I believe she could change? Did I trust her? And most importantly, did I even want to stay? Mia and I met several times to talk. She was honest about everything: why it happened, how she felt, and what she wanted moving forward. She started therapy herself and suggested couples counseling. She was putting in the effort, but something in me had shifted. Every time I looked at her, I saw those texts. Every time she touched me, I thought about him. Trust, once broken, isn't easily rebuilt. But there were moments, tiny glimmers of hope, when I remembered why I fell in love with her. The way she laughed at my bad jokes, how she cared for Scout, and the dreams we built together. It's been 6 months now. We're still together, but it's not the same. Some days I feel like we're making progress. Other days, the weight of betrayal feels insurmountable. I'm still in therapy, and so is she. Couples counseling has helped us communicate better, but the road ahead is long and uncertain. I don't know if we'll make it. Maybe this will be a story of redemption and growth, or maybe it's just a painful lesson about love and boundaries. Either way, it's my story, and I'm living it one day at a time. Growing up, my brother Nick was always the favorite. He was the golden child, the one my parents doted on. I was the quieter, more reserved one, who often found myself overshadowed by Nick's charm and confidence. To the outside world, Nick was charismatic and full of life. But to me, he was a nightmare, a bully in the guise of a brother. Nick had a way of making everything about him. If I got a new toy, he'd find a way to ruin it. If I made a friend, he'd swoop in and steal them. And if I ever complained, my parents would brush it off. "He's just teasing," they'd say, as if that excused his behavior. I grew up resentful, but I learned to keep my head down and focus on my own life. By the time I was in college, I thought I'd left Nick's shadow behind. I met Emma during my junior year, and she was everything I'd ever wanted. Kind, intelligent, and down to earth. We fell in love quickly, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had something that Nick couldn't touch. When Emma and I got engaged, I reluctantly invited Nick. He showed up late, charmed everyone at the party, and even made a joke during his speech about how he used to help me with the ladies. I laughed it off at the time, but Emma later told me she found his behavior strange. "He's your brother, but he's intense," she said. I dismissed it. Nick was Nick. The tension between Nick and me escalated during the wedding planning. He insisted on being my best man, even though I'd planned to ask my best friend, Jared. "Come on, bro, it's tradition," Nick said, flashing his winning smile. Against my better judgment, I gave in. At the wedding, Nick made himself the center of attention again, cracking inappropriate jokes during his toast and dancing with Emma a little too closely for comfort. I chalked it up to him being Nick, but a seed of unease planted itself in my mind. After Emma and I got married, we moved into a small but cozy home. Life seemed perfect, until Nick started inserting himself into our lives. He'd drop by unannounced, often when I wasn't home, bringing gifts for Emma or offering to help around the house. At first, I thought he was trying to be supportive. But then Emma started mentioning how he'd make odd comments like, "You married the wrong brother." Or, "If things had been different." I confronted Nick, but he laughed it off. "Relax, man. I'm just joking," he said. But I wasn't laughing. Emma and I began to argue more, something that had never been an issue before. She started withdrawing, and I couldn't figure out why. One night, after a particularly heated argument, she broke down in tears. "I feel like I'm losing myself," she said, "and I feel like Nick is always watching." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I told her I'd talk to Nick again, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. Everything came crashing down one fateful evening. Emma had been feeling unwell for weeks, and I convinced her to see a doctor. When she came home with the news that she was pregnant, I was overjoyed. But her face told a different story. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. She admitted that during a moment of weakness after one of our arguments, she and Nick had crossed a line. She insisted it was a mistake, a one-time thing, but the damage was done. My world shattered. The baby she was carrying might not be mine. I felt betrayed, angry, and utterly broken. I confronted Nick in a rage, and he didn't even try to deny it. "It just happened," he said, as if that excused everything. "Maybe you should have treated her better." His smugness pushed me over the edge, and for the first time in my life, I punched him. Emma begged for forgiveness, but I couldn't look at her without seeing Nick. I moved out that night, leaving her in tears. After weeks of avoiding Emma, I finally agreed to a paternity test. The results came back, confirming my worst fear. Nick was the father. I felt like my life had been ripped apart at the seams. Emma wanted to work things out, but I couldn't see a future where we could move past this. I made the painful decision to divorce Emma and cut Nick out of my life entirely. My parents, predictably, sided with Nick. "Family is family," my mother said, as if that justified his betrayal. I moved to a new city, started therapy, and focused on rebuilding my life. It's been 3 years since everything happened. Emma and I are on civil terms, mostly because of her child, who I've chosen to have no contact with. Nick's life, from what I hear, is a mess. He tried to make things work with Emma, but their relationship fell apart. Meanwhile, I've started dating again, and I'm finally finding peace. This experience taught me the importance of setting boundaries, even with family. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. But life goes on, and so do I. My parents skipped my wedding. A long, emotional journey. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to write a story like this. But here I am, staring at my screen, typing out an experience that changed me forever. My wedding day, the happiest day of my life, was also one of the most painful because my parents, the people who raised me, chose not to be there. The backstory let me rewind a bit. I grew up in a conservative household with strict values. My parents, who we'll call Linda and Robert, had a clear vision for my life. I was supposed to go to college, get a respectable job, marry someone from our community, and settle down. They loved me in their way, but their love came with conditions. As long as I followed the plan, I was their golden child. Things started to go off script when I met Alex in college. Alex was everything I ever wanted in a partner: kind, funny, supportive, and brilliant. But Alex didn't fit into my parents' worldview. For one, Alex came from a different cultural background. And worse, in their eyes, Alex wasn't religious. When I first told my parents about Alex, their reactions ranged from disbelief to outright anger. "You're throwing your life away," my mother said, her voice trembling with disappointment. My father, usually the calmer of the two, just shook his head. "This won't end well," he muttered. I tried to reason with them, to show them how much Alex loved me and how happy we were together. But their disapproval was unwavering. The engagement bombshell. When Alex proposed to me after 3 years of dating, I knew it would set off a firestorm. I was right. The night I called my parents to share the news, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "You're really doing this?" my father asked finally. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I love Alex, and we're getting married." "Then don't expect us to be part of this circus," my mother snapped before hanging up. I cried that night, crumpled on the floor as Alex held me. Part of me wanted to cancel the wedding, to do anything to mend the rift with my parents. But Alex reminded me of something important. This was my life, and I deserved to live it on my terms. The wedding planning, despite the heartbreak, we moved forward with the wedding plans. I sent my parents an invitation, hoping they'd change their minds. My siblings, who were caught in the crossfire, tried to mediate, but my parents were firm. "We raised her better than this," they'd say. My friends and Alex's family stepped up in ways I never expected. They helped with every detail, from picking out flowers to addressing invitations. Alex's mother even offered to walk me down the aisle if my father wouldn't. Her kindness brought tears to my eyes. The big day. The morning of the wedding, I checked my phone compulsively, hoping for a text or a call from my parents. Nothing. My siblings arrived, offering their support, but their subdued expressions told me they hadn't been able to sway our parents. Walking down the aisle without my father was harder than I anticipated. Alex's mother held my arm tightly, whispering words of encouragement. As I reached the altar and saw Alex's radiant smile, the weight in my chest began to lift. This was my day, our day, and I refused to let my parents' absence ruin it. The fallout after the wedding, I sent my parents a letter. I poured my heart out, explaining how much I loved them despite everything and how much I wished they could have been there. Weeks went by without a response. When they finally called, it was to reiterate their disappointment. "We can't support a marriage that goes against everything we believe in," my mother said. It felt like a punch to the gut. But for the first time, I stood my ground. "I love you both, but I won't apologize for choosing happiness," I told them. A new chapter. It's been 2 years since the wedding. My relationship with my parents is still strained, but we've reached a tentative truce. They don't acknowledge Alex, but they've started calling occasionally to ask about my life. It's not the reconciliation I dreamed of, but it's something. Alex and I are thriving. We bought a house, adopted a dog, and are planning a trip to Europe. Some days, the pain of my parents' absence feels fresh, but I remind myself that I chose love, both for Alex and for myself. Reflections. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that family doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes you have to create your own. My parents may have skipped my wedding, but the people who mattered most were there, cheering me on as I walked into a new chapter of my life. And for that, I am endlessly grateful. My dad is going to shut my mouth. kicked out at 16 by my stepfather. When I was 10, my mom remarried a man named Greg. My dad had passed away when I was just a toddler, so I never had the chance to know him. Greg came into our lives like a whirlwind, charming my mom and, at first, making an effort to bond with me. But things changed quickly. The man who seemed so friendly became a disciplinarian. His rules were never clear, except that everything I did seemed to break them. Once Greg moved in, the dynamic at home shifted. My mom seemed eager to keep him happy, often at my expense. His favoritism became blatant when his own son, Jake, came to live with us. Suddenly, I was the outsider in my own home. If you were more like Jake, maybe Greg wouldn't be so hard on you, my mom would say. It felt like a betrayal, but I swallowed my feelings, not wanting to cause more tension. One evening, Greg accused me of stealing money from his wallet. A ridiculous claim, considering I barely got an allowance. When I denied it, he exploded, calling me ungrateful and lazy. My mom stood silently as Greg yelled, "Maybe I should teach you a lesson." When I told him he wasn't my real dad, his face turned red. "Your real dad isn't here to save you," he snarled. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, after a minor argument about chores, Greg snapped, "Pack your stuff and get out. I've had enough of your attitude," he roared. I looked at my mom, hoping she'd step in. She just lowered her gaze and said, "You should go. It's for the best." I grabbed a backpack and left, stunned that my own mother would choose Greg over me. The first night was terrifying. I wandered around, clutching my backpack, unsure where to go. I ended up sleeping in the stairwell of an apartment building, jumping at every noise. I told myself I'd figure things out tomorrow, but deep down, I felt abandoned. The next morning, I mustered the courage to call my best friend, Alex. His parents were hesitant to let me stay, fearing Greg's reaction, but Alex convinced them. "You're safe here," he said. I crashed on their couch, grateful for their kindness. A few days later, I learned Greg had spread rumors about me to justify kicking me out. He told people I was a troubled kid who'd been caught stealing and lying. Even some family members believed him. I felt humiliated and powerless. My mom didn't even try to defend me. In my darkest moment, I stumbled upon an old box of my dad's belongings that I'd saved from Greg's purges. Inside was a stack of letters addressed to me, written before he died. One line stood out: "Never let anyone shut your mouth. Speak your truth no matter what." For the first time, I felt connected to the father I never knew. I decided I wouldn't let Greg's lies define me. I started taking small jobs, mowing lawns, babysitting, anything I could find, to save up. My goal was to prove to myself and everyone else that I could survive without Greg and my mom. Alex's family helped, giving me a safe place to stay and encouragement when I felt like giving up. Slowly, I started piecing my life back together. One night, Alex's dad suggested I contact my paternal grandparents. I hesitated, unsure how they'd react. But I took the chance and called them. They were shocked to hear what had happened and immediately offered to help. "We've missed you so much," my grandmother said. "You'll always have a home with us." Moving in with my grandparents felt like a fresh start. They told me stories about my dad, painting a picture of a man who was kind, resilient, and fiercely protective of those he loved. "He wouldn't let anyone shut him down," my grandfather said, "and neither should you." Those words became my mantra. At 18, after finishing high school, I decided to confront Greg. I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. I visited the house and knocked on the door. Greg answered, looking as smug as ever. "You have no right to be here," he said. "I have every right," I replied. "You kicked me out and lied about me, but I'm still standing. You didn't break me." He tried to argue, but I didn't let him. I walked away with my head held high, finally free of his shadow. With my grandparents' support, I enrolled in college and started building a future. I kept a photo of my dad on my desk as a reminder of where I came from and how far I'd come. As for my mom, we've spoken a few times, but our relationship remains strained. I've accepted that she made her choice, even if it wasn't me. Now, at 25, I'm thriving. I have a career I love, great friends, and a home filled with warmth and laughter. Greg and his toxic influence are a distant memory, and I've built a life my dad would be proud of. Sometimes I think about the phrase, my dad is gonna shut my mouth. Greg's mocking words during one of his tirades. He thought he'd silence me, but he only fueled my determination to speak my truth and live authentically. Kicked out at 16 by my stepfather, my journey to overcome betrayal. When I was 10, my mom met Greg, the man who would become my stepdad. At first, he seemed great. Charming, helpful, and eager to step into the father role after my dad passed away. I was hesitant at first, but Greg won me over with small gestures, helping with homework, buying me ice cream, and cheering at my soccer games. For a while, it felt like we were a real family again, but cracks started to show soon after he moved in. Greg wasn't as patient as he seemed, and his temper often flared over small things. My mom dismissed it, saying, "He's just stressed." I tried to believe her. When I was 12, my mom and Greg had a baby, my half-sister Lily. I loved her instantly, but her arrival changed everything. Greg's attention shifted entirely to Lily, and I became more of an afterthought. His expectations for me grew harsher too. Suddenly, I was the lazy one, the troublemaker, even though I worked hard in school and helped around the house. "Why can't you be more responsible like Lily will be?" Greg would say. She was a baby. How could I compete? By the time I turned 15, Greg had taken control of every aspect of my life. He monitored my phone, dictated who I could hang out with, and gave me endless chores. If I dared to question him, he'd explode, calling me ungrateful and disrespectful. Mom rarely intervened. She seemed caught between wanting to defend me and keeping Greg happy. The more I tried to stand up for myself, the more isolated I felt. The day everything fell apart is burned into my memory. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I'd stayed late at school for a group project. When I got home, Greg was waiting for me, furious. "You're out past curfew," he yelled, even though it wasn't even dark yet. I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. "You think you can just do whatever you want under my roof? You're done, kid." I didn't realize what he meant until he started throwing my things into garbage bags. Mom stood in the corner, silent and teary-eyed. I begged her to stop him, but she just said, "It's for the best." That night, at just 16 years old, I found myself standing on the sidewalk with 2 garbage bags of belongings and nowhere to go. I spent my first night sleeping at a bus stop. It was cold, and I was terrified. I kept expecting someone to come looking for me, but no one did. My phone was blowing up with messages from Greg, all variations of "you brought this on yourself" and "don't even think about coming back." The reality sank in. I was on my own. The next few days were a blur. I reached out to friends, but most of their parents were hesitant to take in a kid with family issues. Eventually, a friend's older brother directed me to a local shelter for teens. It was far from ideal. Crowded, noisy, and filled with people who had their own struggles. But it was better than the streets. At the shelter, I met a counselor named Carla. She was the first adult who actually listened to me without judgment. "You're stronger than you think," she told me. Those words stuck with me. Balancing school while living in a shelter was brutal. I'd wake up early to catch a bus, do my best to focus in class, and then rush back to the shelter before curfew. My grades started slipping, and some teachers noticed. When one of them, Mr. Ellis, asked if I was okay, I broke down and told him everything. He connected me with the school's social worker, who helped me navigate resources for housing and food. Slowly, I started to feel like I wasn't completely alone. At 17, I got my first job at a local diner. It wasn't glamorous, cleaning tables and washing dishes, but it gave me a sense of control over my life. The manager, Marcy, became something of a mentor. She'd let me take leftovers home and even gave me extra shifts when she knew I needed the money. With her encouragement, I started saving for my own place. It wasn't much, but it was a step toward independence. One day, after months of silence, I saw my mom in the grocery store. She looked shocked to see me. thinner and more worn than the kid she'd last seen. "I've been meaning to call you," she said awkwardly. "Why didn't you stop him?" I blurted out. All the anger and hurt I'd bottled up came pouring out. "You let him throw me out like I was nothing." Tears welled up in her eyes, but her excuses felt hollow. "I didn't know what to do," she said. I walked away, realizing she'd never be the mom I needed her to be. By the time I turned 18, I'd saved enough to rent a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much, just a bed, a table, and a leaky faucet. But it was mine. Standing in that space, I felt a sense of pride I'd never known before. I'd survived, and I was finally free. With a stable place to live, I started focusing on my future. I enrolled in community college, determined to build a better life. Carla, my counselor from the shelter, wrote me a glowing recommendation, and Marcy helped me with tuition through a small scholarship she funded for employees. Bit by bit, I rebuilt myself. I made new friends, excelled in my classes, and even started volunteering at the shelter that had once been my refuge. Now, at 25, I've come a long way from the scared 16-year-old standing on the sidewalk with garbage bags. I have a degree, a steady job, and a support system I've built from scratch. As for Greg and my mom, I haven't spoken to Greg since that day, and my relationship with my mom remains distant. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about the people who stand by you when the world falls apart. Looking back, I wouldn't wish my journey on anyone, but I'm proud of the person I've become. Sometimes the hardest roads lead to the brightest destinations. My wife hired a private investigator while I cheated with my secretary. For years, I thought I was living the dream. A beautiful wife who adored me, a stable job that afforded us a comfortable lifestyle, and a home filled with warmth and laughter. But life isn't a fairy tale. And as it turns out, I wasn't the hero of this story. I was the villain. It all began innocently enough. Or at least that's what I told myself. Her name was Rachel, my new secretary. Fresh out of college, she was sharp, ambitious, and had an infectious smile that lit up the office. At first, our interactions were professional. Polite greetings, brief exchanges about schedules and tasks. But over time, those conversations grew longer, more personal. A shared laugh here, a compliment there. I knew I was playing with fire, but the thrill was intoxicating. At home, my wife Sarah noticed the changes. The late nights at work, the quick glances at my phone, the way I seemed distracted even when we were together. Sarah wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend, the one person who could see through my facade. And yet, I underestimated her. I underestimated the lengths she would go to uncover the truth. One evening, as I sat at the dinner table scrolling through emails, Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts. "Who's Rachel?" she asked casually, her tone betraying nothing. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly masked my surprise. "My secretary," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Why?" She shrugged, brushing off the question as if it were of no consequence. But that night, as I lay in bed next to her, my mind raced. Had I been careless? Was she suspicious? I dismissed the thought, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. Sarah was trusting, almost to a fault. She would never suspect me of something so despicable. Or so I believed. Unbeknownst to me, Sarah had already taken the first step toward uncovering my betrayal. A week earlier, she had noticed a smudge of lipstick on my collar, a shade she never wore. She'd also found receipts for dinners I'd never mentioned and caught the faintest whiff of perfume that wasn't hers. While I dismissed her growing unease as paranoia, she was quietly gathering evidence. And then she made a decision that would change everything. She hired a private investigator. The investigator, Mark, was a seasoned professional. He'd seen it all: the lies, the secrets, the heartbreak. When Sarah came to him with her suspicions, he listened intently, jotting down notes as she recounted the small inconsistencies in my behavior. He assured her that he would handle everything discreetly and advised her to remain patient. The next few weeks passed uneventfully, at least from my perspective. I continued my affair with Rachel, oblivious to the fact that I was being watched. Mark followed me everywhere, to the office, to lunch dates with Rachel, to the hotel where we met in secret. He photographed everything: the lingering touches, the stolen kisses, the way we laughed like carefree lovers. He compiled a damning dossier that left no room for doubt. Meanwhile, Sarah pretended everything was normal. She greeted me with a smile when I came home, cooked my favorite meals, and even suggested a weekend getaway to reconnect. Her composure was unnerving, but I was too wrapped up in my double life to notice the cracks beneath her calm exterior. The confrontation came on a rainy Friday evening. I walked into the living room to find Sarah sitting on the couch, a folder resting on the coffee table in front of her. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. "We need to talk," she said quietly. My stomach churned as I sat down across from her. She slid the folder toward me, her hands trembling slightly. "Open it," she said. Reluctantly, I obeyed. The first photo was a grainy shot of Rachel and me walking into the hotel. The second showed us sitting at a corner table in a dimly lit restaurant, her hand resting on mine. There were dozens more, each one more incriminating than the last. "How long?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, but the pain in her tone was unmistakable. I couldn't meet her eyes. "A few months," I admitted, my voice hollow. She nodded as if she'd expected the answer but hoped for something different. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Her questions shattered me. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that she'd done nothing wrong. But the truth was, I didn't have an answer. I'd let my ego and insecurities lead me down a path of destruction, and now I was reaping the consequences. The days that followed were a blur. Sarah moved out, taking only what she needed. The house, once filled with laughter and love, felt cold and empty. Word of the affair spread quickly. Colleagues whispered behind my back, friends distanced themselves, and Rachel, faced with the fallout, ended things between us. I was left alone to face the wreckage I'd created. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I started therapy, hoping to understand the choices that had led me to betray the person who loved me most. I reached out to Sarah, not to win her back, but to apologize and take responsibility for my actions. She listened, her expression guarded, and thanked me for my honesty. But her eyes told me what I already knew. There was no going back. Sarah, too, embarked on her own journey of healing. She leaned on friends and family, took up yoga, and even started painting again, a hobby she'd abandoned years ago. Over time, she rediscovered her strength and independence, proving to herself and the world that she didn't need me to be whole. A year later, we ran into each other at a coffee shop. She looked radiant, her smile genuine and unburdened. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up like old friends. When I apologized once more, she placed a hand on mine and said, "I forgave you a long time ago. For me, not for you." Her words, though kind, were a reminder of the pain I'd caused and the love I'd lost. Life went on. I continued therapy, built healthier relationships, and worked to become a better version of myself. But I never forgot the lesson Sarah taught me. Love is a gift, not a guarantee. And once broken, some things can never be fully mended. I left my dream for my family, a journey of sacrifice and redemption. I grew up in a small town nestled in the rolling hills of rural America. It wasn't the kind of place where big dreams often took root. Most of my peers settled for lives that mirrored their parents, working in the local factories, managing small businesses, or farming the land. But I was different. I had a spark inside me that craved something more, something beyond the confines of my hometown. My dream was to become a software engineer. From the moment I touched my first computer at the age of 10, I was hooked. My parents had saved for months to buy me that old, secondhand desktop, and I'd spent countless hours tinkering with it, pulling apart the hardware and teaching myself to code. By the time I graduated high school, I had built my first app, a rudimentary tool to help local farmers track crop yields. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was mine. When I got accepted into a prestigious university on a partial scholarship, it felt like all the sacrifices my family and I had made were finally paying off. My mom worked long hours as a nurse, and my dad ran a small diner that barely broke even most months. They were my biggest cheerleaders, and when I left for college, their pride was almost palpable. But life, as I'd soon learn, doesn't always follow the trajectory of our dreams. My first year of university was a whirlwind of new experiences. I threw myself into my studies, joined coding clubs, and even landed an internship with a startup. My professors were supportive, and my peers inspired me to push my limits. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to a community that shared my passion. Back home, things were different. The pandemic hit my dad's diner hard. Customers dwindled and bills piled up. My mom started picking up double shifts at the hospital, and my younger siblings, Jake and Emily, were struggling with online school. My parents didn't tell me how bad things were, but I could hear it in their voices during our weekly calls. My dad's usually jovial tone had been replaced by a weary resignation, and my mom's laughter seemed forced. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of classes and work, I received a call from Jake. He was only 13, but the weight in his voice made him sound so much older. "Hey, Mia," he began hesitantly. "What's up, buddy?" I replied, trying to sound cheerful. I need some help with my math homework," he said, but I could tell there was more. "Sure thing," I said. "Let's hear it." As we worked through the equations, he finally admitted the real reason for his call. The school was organizing a field trip, and he didn't want to ask Dad for the $50 fee. "He's already so stressed," Jake said quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. My family was struggling, and here I was, living in a dorm, chasing a dream that suddenly felt selfish. I'd always believed that my education would be the key to lifting my family out of hardship. But what good was a future promise when they needed help now? The next morning, I made the hardest decision of my life. I walked into the registrar's office and withdrew from all my classes. My heart felt like it was breaking, but I knew it was the right thing to do. When I called my parents to tell them, my mom cried. "Mia, you don't have to do this," she said. "Mom, it's okay," I assured her. "This is what family does." I packed up my dorm room and returned home that weekend. The house felt smaller than I remembered, and the air was heavy with unspoken worries. My dad tried to put on a brave face, but I could see the relief in his eyes when I handed him my first paycheck from my new job as a grocery store cashier. Life back home was a stark contrast to my days at university. My mornings started early, helping my siblings with their schoolwork before my shift at the store. Evenings were spent at the diner, where I'd taken over the bookkeeping to help my dad. The work was exhausting, but it was also grounding. For the first time in years, I felt deeply connected to my family. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy. Jake's face lit up when I surprised him by covering the cost of his field trip. Emily, who was just 10, started baking cookies for the diner to sell, and her creations quickly became a hit with the customers. My dad's smile slowly returned, and my mom, though still tired, seemed less burdened. But there were also moments of doubt. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd pull out my laptop and stare at the lines of code I'd written months ago. I missed the thrill of solving complex problems, the camaraderie of my classmates, and the feeling of working towards something bigger than myself. 2 years passed in this rhythm of sacrifice and resilience. Slowly but surely, my family's situation improved. My dad reopened the diner on a smaller scale, focusing on takeout and catering. My mom cut back on her shifts, and Jake and Emily thrived in school. One day, while scrolling through my emails, I saw a message from one of my old professors. He'd heard about my situation and wanted to recommend me for a remote coding internship with a nonprofit. The role was part-time, flexible, and paid just enough to cover my own expenses. "You have too much talent to let it go to waste," he wrote. Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. It felt like a lifeline, a chance to reconnect with my passion without abandoning my responsibilities. I accepted the offer and started the following week. Balancing the internship with my other commitments wasn't easy, but I'd learned how to juggle challenges over the past 2 years. The work reignited my love for coding, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Now, as I sit here writing this, I'm back in school, online this time. I'm finishing my degree at my own pace with the support of my family and the experience of those 2 transformative years. My journey didn't follow the path I'd envisioned, but it led me to a deeper understanding of what truly matters. Dreams are important, but so is family. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is putting others before yourself. I may have left university, but I never stopped learning. And in the process, I discovered that sacrifice, love, and resilience are the most valuable lessons of all.